To me, it's very interesting that they chose to make a Daredevil movie, as I find him to be one of those superheroes that's usually overlooked. When you think of the heroes of Marvel, you think of Spider-Man, Captain America, the Hulk, the Avengers, the X-Men, that kind of thing. But despite being around as long as most of those, he tends to not get much attention. The basic premise is that Daredevil is a superhero with a disability. He's blind, but his other four senses are ratcheted up so far that he's able to operate in day-to-day life with no problems. And he has a radar sense that allows him to see his surroundings. Daredevil operates at a New York City, fights mostly street criminals, and also has his own colorful rogues gallery. Sound familiar? Yeah, he's fairly similar to Spider-Man, and one of the first crossover stories ever told, meaning a story that begins in one comic and then continues in a completely different one, was between Daredevil and Spider-Man. So, coming the year after the wildly successful Spider-Man film, it's no surprise that most reviews of Daredevil tend to compare it to that film. Well, I'll get that out of the way right away and tell you that Daredevil is nowhere near as good of a film as Spider-Man, but does it hold up on its own? We have an interesting cast here. Ben Affleck plays Matt Murdock, who becomes Daredevil. Jennifer Garner plays the ambiguous, sometimes good, sometimes bad Greek assassin Elektra. And the primary antagonists are Michael Clarke Duncan as the Kingpin and Colin Farrell as Bullseye. Some people had problems with the Kingpin being played by a black guy, as he's a white guy in the comics, and originally they actually did try to get a white guy, but they settled on Michael Clarke Duncan because he screen tested the best. And honestly, I do have a lot of issues with the film, but this is not one of them. The Kingpin is the sort of character that it really doesn't make a difference if he's a black guy. I think it's more important that they get a good actor to play the role than to match him up exactly with the comic. My issues with the cast is that Affleck and Garner are lousy, but Farrell and Duncan are great. The issue is that Bullseye and the Kingpin don't get enough screen time. In some movies, like most of the Batman movies, the villain really steals the show and sometimes has more screen time than the hero. But in this case, the villains are barely present. The story is pretty simple. We get the origin where Matt Murdock, as a young man, is blinded by chemicals, and his father is killed by thugs after refusing to take a fall in a boxing match. Then there's a huge gap in the narrative, and Matt is already an adult, already operating as Daredevil, and for no apparent reason, covered in scars. I've heard that there's a deleted scene that explains why he's covered in scars, but I'm not here to review deleted scenes. One thing that I wish they would have explained is why he sleeps in a sensory deprivation chamber. I mean, I get that his heightened senses can be an issue, but after boning Elektra, he seems to have no issue sleeping in a bed. You know, I just thought of something. Wouldn't Daredevil having sex be hilarious? He'd finish in like 4 seconds. Anyway, the whole thing about being trained and whatnot, it's not in the movie. We just skip from him as a kid to him as Daredevil. As a lawyer, I'm confused to what's going on here. Is he a defense attorney or a prosecutor? In the comics, and in most scenes, he seems to be a defense attorney, as he claims that he only wants to represent clients that are innocent, and that his clients have issues paying him, but in a courtroom scene, he seems to be prosecuting a rapist. But when he refers to his client, he seems to be talking about the rape victim. If you're going to do a courtroom scene, do some damn research. Anyway, when the rapist gets away with it, he goes and puts on the Daredevil costume and goes out and murders the guy. Wow, huh? He even leaves a calling card, the DD icon in gasoline, which a reporter named Ben Urich lights up at the crime scene to prove to the cops that Daredevil exists. What is he, the Crow? I don't know. I'm not so sure about Daredevil just throwing a dude in front of a train, even if he is a rapist. Aside from the fact that it never would have happened in the comics, it just makes the movie uneven. At times it seems like they're going for a dark, gritty movie, but when Matt and Elektra have their silly playground fight, the film teeters on lighthearted comedy. At the end, after fighting the Kingpin, he chooses not to kill him, saying that Elektra saved him. I don't know how she did that. What she did do was get impaled by Bullseye and fall off a roof. This is 4 seconds after Daredevil pretty much attempted to murder Bullseye. It's only by a post-credit scene that you know that the villain survives. So, does he kill or doesn't he? I guess it depends on what he had for lunch that day. The Kingpin kills Elektra's father, but Elektra thinks Daredevil do it, so they fight, and then they both fight Bullseye, and then Daredevil fights the Kingpin. If I had to say one nice thing about the film, the fight scenes are actually done really well. The last parts of the movie are the most entertaining. The problem is that getting there is just painful. You have to sit through a lot of awkward dialogue, scenes that seem like they're from another movie, and Affleck and Gardner's wooden acting. Colin Farrell and Michael Clarke Duncan might have saved the film at the end, but as far as I'm concerned, the damage was done. The worst thing about Daredevil is that it's just hard to care for any of the characters. They're extremely one-dimensional, and attempts to deepen characters like Murdock himself are far too flimsy. I guess people generally agree with me, as the movie performed horribly at the box office and got bad reviews in general, and there was never a sequel, though Elektra got her own spin-off. I haven't seen that, but I heard it's awful. Daredevil isn't bad enough to be called awful, as it is at least having some good action. The villains are well done, and I think they did a good job with with the Daredevil costume, but it seems a whole lot of work just to get to the good parts. I'll give it a 5 out of a possible 10.